In a grand, brightly lit palace restaurant, a young gentleman sits across from a young lady, enjoying tea with her. He intends to propose that she become his wife for just 1 year. The blue-eyed, blonde-haired man's gaze is cold as ice as he awaits her response. Seeing the confusion in her eyes, he decides to confess that he already has a lover. The young lady is already aware of this and understands that this marriage is merely for show. He promises that after a year, she and her family will be able to live the rest of their lives without worry. He is certain that this deal is particularly advantageous for her. He comes from the Kappas family, a merchant family that conducts business with commoners in the West. For many years, this family only possessed a mediocre trading house. However, Zachary Kappas, the head of the family, decided to introduce new business practices, which led to a significant increase in the company's sales, and the Kappas family began to be talked about. Their reputation even began to grow in the capital. The company's greatest strength lay in its ability to adopt different strategies for each client. Furthermore, they paid their workers extremely low wages, thereby significantly reducing costs. In their business dealings, they primarily targeted impoverished nobles, setting acceptable prices for their goods. Later, the company became extremely popular and even established its own jewelry brand. Many other companies could not withstand the competition and quickly withdrew from the market. Those unemployed jewelers had no choice but to work for the Kappas family at low wages. Because of this, the company's sales grew rapidly. Zachary learned that in the past 6 months, the sales figures reported by his son had tripled. However, the head of the family was not satisfied with this and decided to further increase profits by shifting their focus to wealthy nobles. But to his regret, attracting new clients was not an easy task. So, lacking connections, Zachary set his sights on the Baron Follett family. This was an impoverished, noble family with a small amount of territory in the eastern and western provinces of the empire. The family only retained its noble title. Among the Follett family's ancestors were those who held high positions in the capital. For their loyal service, the Follett family was granted the land they still held. Learning of the family's predicament, Zachary Kappas proposed a marriage alliance. Baron Follett was unwilling to marry his beloved daughter to someone from the Kappas family under any circumstances. However, to save his people, he ultimately had to make this decision. Thus, the eldest daughter of the Follett family married one of the sons of the Kappas family. With their title, Zachary's company gained access to high society circles. Now, he could finally do business directly with wealthy nobles. To the surprise of Judah, the commoner eldest daughter of Baron Follett, her husband Leonard from the Kappas family immediately proposed a divorce. He decided to marry her for 1 year, after which he would pay the Follett family a large sum of money. She wouldn't even have to worry about loneliness, as their marriage was only temporary. Moreover, she could have everything she desired and would never have to struggle for a living again. Leonard understood that regaining his own assets wouldn't be easy, but he was willing to do whatever it took. In his opinion, this proposal was extremely beneficial to Judah, and he didn't understand why she was still hesitating. Judah knew that Kappas's lover was named Miranda Axon. She and Leonard had met at the academy and later became lovers. They even promised to marry after Miranda graduated. However, on the path to their ideal future, Judah suddenly appeared. She understood that they would do everything in their power to pursue their own happiness. Leonard desperately hoped she wouldn't let anyone see their temporary prenuptial agreement. The agreement had 3 stipulations. The first was that the couple must live separately. The second was that they could not be alone together under any circumstances. The third and final stipulation was that his true wife was Miranda, and Judah was merely a temporary cover. Judah pondered more than once what she would gain in return for such a life. As a living ghost, once divorced, a noble woman, unlike a commoner, would be forced to bear the stigma of a fallen woman. Everything a divorced noble woman did would be inherently viewed as vulgar and unworthy. To avoid this, noble women, no matter how unbearable their lives, had to live with their husbands. However, Leonard ruthlessly robbed Judah of her happy future. Finally, she agreed to walk the path of a woman scorned by society, all to protect everything she held dear. Judy agreed to a contractual marriage for 1 year. It all began on a bright sunny day, with Judy's calls for Inez echoing through Follett Castle. The maid was quietly cleaning the room. She worked while admiring the beautiful scenery outside the window. However, upon hearing Judy's shriek, the woman spun around, completely bewildered by what had caused the girl such excitement. It turned out that the young lady was eager to share good news. Walter was finally arriving today. Inez was happy for her, but hoped Judy could calm down first. Moreover, a servant would be accompanying the master today, so the maid would also be busy. Judy excitedly hugged Inez, convinced that the hero might even propose today. The maid replied that even so, the young lady wouldn't truly become a lady. Judy frowned, comparing the woman to her father, who also believed she should be more gentle. Suddenly, Judy noticed something strange in Inez's hand, but Inez pretended there was nothing. Afterward, she feigned busyness and hurried away, but Judy still noticed the object in her hand. Seeing this, Judy felt a little disappointed and dismissed the maid, deciding to start preparing for Walter's arrival. Inez remembered that it was supposed to rain today, so she advised the young lady against going into town. Judy's hometown was Follett, with its 2 blacksmiths, 3 shops, 2 arched bridges spanning the river, and dozens of small houses. Judy resisted the advice and decided to go to the flower shop to buy a beautiful bouquet. She was the eldest daughter of the land steward, and their family name came from the name of the city. The florist, Lucy, was happy to serve the young lady. Judy was captivated by the beautiful flowers in Lucy's hands, while Lucy inquired about Judy's mother's well-being. Also, Lucy's daughter was very happy after receiving the exquisite drawing Judy had gifted her. Lucy felt that a mother must be worried about her excellent daughter getting married, like Judy. Judy quickly reassured her, as Walter hadn't proposed yet. However, Lucy believed that the hero would do so sooner or later. Suddenly, it really started to rain outside, which stunned Judy, as she hadn't brought an umbrella. Lucy's spare umbrella was with her husband, and Judy realized she shouldn't have ignored Inez's advice. Walter was coming soon, and this made her upset. Fortunately, Lucy's husband suddenly appeared, holding their little daughter, who happily greeted her mother. After Peter greeted his wife, he was very surprised to see Miss Judy there. Judy smiled back, returning his and his daughter's greetings. After handing Judy the umbrella, Peter went into the flower shop with his daughter, waving goodbye to Judy along with Lucy. Judy hurried home, fantasizing about a happy future with Walter and their children. Back home, she gave the umbrella to Hans, the butler, specifically instructing him to return it to Lucy. Then, she handed the flowers to Inez, asking her to put them in the living room. She also learned from the maid that Mr. Walter had already arrived. Upon hearing this news, Judy was surprised and at a loss for what to do. Meanwhile, Baron Follett, having learned the news from the hero, was disappointed that Bevins hadn't met his expectations. However, Walter didn't want his master to keep the man any longer, as there was nothing he could do. A servant entered, reminding them that the young lady was waiting in the living room. He also wanted to confirm if they needed an escort. Walter lowered his head, sadly agreeing, accepting that the moment had finally arrived. There was no turning back. In the living room, Judy, having created an atmosphere of perfect comfort and harmony, anxiously awaited the hero's arrival. When she saw him at the door, her heart was filled with joy. Walter entered the living room enthusiastically, first apologizing for keeping her waiting, but Judy thought it was nothing, as he was probably talking to her father. Judy thought the Baron was harsh, and probably hadn't even offered their guest any tea. She had originally intended to decorate the room before his arrival, hoping to surprise the hero into speechlessness, but unfortunately, she hadn't managed to do so. Walter's gaze remained fixed on the beautiful bouquet, the flowers that had been a part of his life since birth, deeply moving him. The girl looked at him expectantly, hoping to hear that one question from the hero's lips. However, to everyone's surprise, Walter ultimately decided he couldn't propose to Judy. He asked her to pretend they had never discussed marriage. Walter clenched his fists, silently begging Judy for forgiveness. Judy was utterly shocked, barely able to comprehend what was happening. It turned out Walter had been fired again, and every time he tried to find out why, he was ignored. It seemed someone was deliberately pressuring them to dismiss him. Walter realized that if he continued working for Mr. Bevan's business would likely suffer. He sincerely apologized to Judy, but she felt he had nothing to apologize for. Hadn't Walter spoken to her father without telling her beforehand? She had been so sure of their complete trust in each other. but Walter simply hadn't wanted her to find out this way. Judy learned that Mr. Bevan's maternal relatives were subordinates of the Capps family. Therefore, it was clear that Zachary Capps himself was behind all of this. Hearing the name, Walter's expression darkened, confirming Judy's suspicions. The Follett family owned a small territory in the southeastern part of the Western Province. The head of the family held the title of Baron and participated in the Imperial State Council. Despite this, the Follett family lived much like wealthy commoners without a noble title. The next morning, Annie's came to Judy's room to wake her. Judging by the look on Judy's face, the maid guessed she had gone to bed very late. Annie's was surprised to see the thick book Fundamentals of Trade by her bedside. It turned out that Judy, upset after Walter left, had read the entire book in one sitting. The maid admired Judy's academic dedication, believing she would be a top student if she attended the academy. Judy smiled shyly in response. She didn't actually want to go anywhere. In fact, she felt her father taught her far more than the academy could. Besides, if she went to the academy, her younger sisters would be in a difficult position. She was content with her homeschooling, which touched the maid. They had only 2 servants, Annie's, the maid, and Hans, the butler. Baron Follett wasn't as wealthy as other nobles, but his subjects were very loyal. For some reason, many believed nobles shouldn't treat their subjects well, but they didn't share that view. Judy walked down the hallway, lost in thought, when she heard a tapping at the window. It was May, Annie's daughter. Judy greeted her, and May told her that her mother shouldn't know she was there. Judy wondered if May was up to mischief again, behind Annie's back. The little girl protested this notion, insisting she wasn't mischievous at all, just wanting to show Judy something. Judy didn't immediately see what May was pointing at, but when she heard rustling in the grass and looked, she was delighted to discover several kittens. It seemed their mother was busy elsewhere, leaving the kittens alone. Judy thought that perhaps May felt lonely when her mother was working, but the little girl said that wasn't the case. She also wanted to tell Judy that a strange old man had come to the Follett house. All May could say was that the man was very fierce and unpleasant. Judy smiled, thinking that the little girl shouldn't judge people by their appearance. However, the little girl insisted the old man had a scary face. She looked earnestly at Judy, wondering if she was bad for saying such things. Judy knew that sometimes children, like small animals, had a sharp, instinctive sense of judgment. At that moment, she didn't know what kind of threat her family was facing. Later, when she encountered Hans, Judy wondered why her father hadn't informed her about the strange visitor. Hans said that a stranger had indeed come to see the Baron not long ago, but the situation wasn't simple. Judy asked if the stranger had left, and indeed he had, driven away by the Baron himself. Hearing this, Judy was astonished. She couldn't understand who could anger her father so much. Hans suggested she ask the Baron directly. Judy agreed and went inside, full of questions. Her father, though sometimes playful, was a calm and reasonable man, and it wasn't easy to anger him, which made Judy even more perplexed. The visitor must have been very old, since May had called him an old man. It was certain that the visitor wasn't a local. If he were from the city, her father wouldn't have been so angry. Therefore, Judy was absolutely sure that this visitor had come from afar. Later, the Baron unexpectedly summoned her to his study, and she hurried over. She pushed the door open and, as she announced her arrival, saw her father standing by the window, his expression extremely grave. He turned around and, somewhat apologetically, explained that due to pressing matters, he wouldn't be able to dine with her tonight and hoped she was well. Judy quickly reassured him, saying that everything was fine and that she had lunch with her mother. Not wanting to waste time, she decided to ask him directly who had visited today. But the Baron suddenly interrupted her, looking intently at his daughter. He wanted to know if she had finished reading the book he had recently given her. It turned out she had finished it, although it had taken her longer than previous books. Hearing that she had read the entire book, her father was quite surprised, laughing and remarking that she had far exceeded his expectations. He had read the book himself when she was still at the academy, so it was a bit old, but he was pleased she had finished it. Judy felt that her father had taught her too well, and that in the future, as the eldest daughter, she would have to share the burden of the family estate. Just then, her father's face suddenly darkened, and he looked seriously at her. He lowered his head and sighed, lamenting that she truly was his eldest daughter. Judy became even more curious about who had come to see him today. Her father lowered his head, clearly not wanting her to know. Having no other choice, and hoping his daughter would forgive her incompetent father, he decided to bring up the subject of her marriage. Hearing these words, Judy was shocked, as the situation between her and Walter was already quite complicated. Her father understood this too, although he remembered how much she had once longed to marry Walter. However, they hadn't anticipated the sudden visit from the Cap's family, which had completely disrupted everything. Upon hearing this news, the girl desperately hoped she had misheard. The Cap's family owned the largest trading company in the Western continent, and everyone considered them to be utter villains. Could Zachary really have been here? It turned out that it was indeed him. The Baron had also been startled by this man's sudden appearance. Even more shocking was that he wanted Judy to marry one of his sons. Hearing this, Judy couldn't understand what it meant at all, but was quickly relieved by her father's next words. He had refused him. Both Judy and her father were well aware of the Cap's family's reputation. They exploited the naivety and foolishness of many nobles for their own gain. Furthermore, they made common laborers toil for meager wages. Even without the matter of Walter, her father would never marry his daughter to such a scoundrel. Her father knew that no one in the Follett family would agree to this marriage, so he flatly refused Zachary. But this seemed to have the opposite effect. The old man became even more obstinate, staring fiercely at the Baron with snake-like eyes. Her father shouldn't have treated Zachary like an ordinary commoner. No matter how much the Baron argued, it was useless. The old man was determined to have his daughter one way or another. He even threatened to ruin their meager estate if he so wished, as the Cap's family had the power to do so. Before leaving, Zachary warned her father that he would certainly regret today's decision. A short while later, Judy, consumed with anger, didn't know what to do next. She ran back to her room, hurried to her desk, and desperately tried to think of a solution. Just then, Agnes knocked on the door, wanting to bring her a message from Mr. Walter. But at that moment, Judy couldn't accept any information, nor did she want to hear any news. The maid understood her feelings and didn't insist, quietly leaving the room. Before leaving, she wished her mistress a good rest and a speedy recovery. At this point, Judy realized that Zachary had been right. 2 months ago, he had appeared suddenly, wanting his son to marry her. But the Baron, enraged, had driven Caps out. Caps had vowed that they would regret it sooner or later. Not long after, Walter had been unexpectedly dismissed from his job. Walter had worked at that company for 10 years, always diligent and responsible, earning his boss's trust. He was on the verge of a promotion. However, Walter inexplicably received a dismissal notice, accompanied by a pathetic apology from his former boss. There was no doubt that this was the old man's doing. To recover from the blow, Walter found a new job at another company, but was soon fired again, so he decided to try his luck once more. After that, with every new job, they always found reasons to fire Walter. He kept losing his new jobs, seemingly for no reason, and Judy couldn't help him in any way. All she could do was offer him a cup of tea every time he visited. Judy hugged him tightly, admiring all the efforts Walter was making for her. Even in such difficult times, Walter found the strength not to give up and continued his job search. Judy realized that all of this was Zachary's doing, and today she was furious. When Walter came to see her again, he shocked her with his decision not to get married. Judy tried to persuade him, considering herself a very talented person. Because of this, they didn't have to stay in Follett's territory and could go far away. She believed they could find work somewhere the old man couldn't reach them. Besides, with Walter's abilities, he could adapt to any working environment. Judy believed that a title alone wasn't enough to make her stay. Therefore, she believed they could leave this place and start a new life. But Walter objected. Every word she said felt like a knife twisting in his heart. Judy no longer needed to pretend, much less try to sacrifice herself. After all, Walter knew very well that she deeply loved her homeland. He had watched her, the princess of his heart, since childhood. Walter firmly believed that she spent wonderful days among her loyal subjects. Everyone in the city sincerely loved Judy and took care of her in every possible way. She couldn't even imagine how much the locals cherished her. Moreover, judging by her words, Judy had forgotten their lifelong dream. She and Walter had dreamed of living a peaceful and harmonious life in this earthly paradise called Follett. Therefore, Judy first needed to understand that this wasn't just about the two of them. Besides, Walter wasn't sure if such an escape would really help them. After all, whatever happened would definitely affect the city's residents. Hearing this, Judy felt a chill down her spine, suffocating. If they continued to desperately resist, Zachary would simply change his methods. The biggest problem now was that Judy's subjects were in danger. After the conversation, Judy returned to her room and went to the window where she saw Walter leaving. At one point, he abruptly turned and looked directly at the window of Judy's bedroom. But Judy immediately stepped back, hiding behind the drawn curtains. Now, she didn't even dare to look at Walter, feeling unworthy. Judy felt very ashamed that she was too naive to see the whole picture. Walter had confessed that, according to the Baron, Zachary had bribed all the trading companies. Now, none of them were buying products from Follett's territory anymore. Judy couldn't understand how this was possible, as they had always been happy to sign supply contracts before. However, another problem was that the trading companies had significantly increased the prices of goods sold in Follett's territory. Hearing the girl's father talk about this, Walter was shocked because this meant all the locals would suffer. The Baron had always strived to make life better for his subjects, but now the situation had taken a sharp turn for the worse. Now, the head of the family understood that if things continued this way, they would soon be unable to even pay the imperial taxes. Judy was confused, not understanding why the merchants and camps were treating them this way. Walter also didn't understand how Zachary had managed to persuade them. The only thing that was clear was that everyone was now under intense pressure from the Karpus family. Judy was furious about the current situation because all they wanted was a peaceful life. This morning, she had seen a family album in Annis's hands with the names of their distant relatives written in it. At the time, Judy hadn't understood why they had suddenly decided to contact these relatives. If you remember, Peter had looked strange when he returned with his daughter. He had wanted to talk to Lucy about the rent, but immediately changed the subject when he saw Judy. Their flower shop had close ties with the trading companies in the big city. Now Judy understood that Lucy's family had already been in trouble back then, and she hadn't known anything about it. Even in Follett's territory, there was a clear line between rich and poor. They did their best to maintain balance and reconcile these social classes. The Baron and Judy put all their efforts into this, whether it was possible or not. However, no matter how much power the nobles held, they were insignificant compared to the Merchants Guild. They couldn't guarantee the continued prosperity of their businesses, as the guild could leverage the influence of large companies. Therefore, as if nothing had happened, it could easily destroy the lives of the poor. That scoundrel Zachary must have taken advantage of this, and his methods were incredibly cruel. The old gentleman, though a commoner himself, seemed to have no understanding of the hardships of the poor. Maintaining a balance between different social classes had always been a top priority in the Follett family's policies. This clearly displeased the merchants of the guild, as they felt restricted. It was these people who were manipulated by that old man skilled in swaying hearts. Judy's beloved Walter McCregan had lived in the Follett territory since childhood. In his youth, he was recognized by those around him for his outstanding business acumen. Back then, he often visited the manor on business, and over time, Judy and this hero came to know and love each other. One day, she was sitting alone on a bench in the beautiful forest, reading a book, when she suddenly heard footsteps behind her. She turned around and was surprised to see that it was Walter. He had returned from the capital at her request, bringing with him a collection of poems, which made her very happy. Judy knew he must have gone to great lengths to obtain this collection, but Walter was happy to help her. In fact, he had also hidden a small gift within the book, hoping she would have time to look at it. Judy clutched the poetry book tightly, barely able to resist opening it immediately. Quickly, she ran back to her room like a gust of wind, startling Annis. Closing the door and opening the book, she was surprised to find nothing inside, yet every page emitted a very pleasant fragrance. Judy sniffed and realized it was the scent of sea onions, a symbol of eternal love. At that moment, she understood that no matter what happened, Walter would always love her. And now, he had refused their dream wedding, solely to protect her from Zachary's harm. However, Judy knew very well that her hero wanted to protect more than just the two of them. In fact, he wanted to protect everything she cherished. Protecting the Follett territory was equivalent to protecting her, and vice versa. But Judy could no longer sit idly by. She wanted to take action. She left her room and called for Annis, wanting the maid to run an errand for her. Annis was surprised to hear that Judy wanted to write a letter to her father. So Judy asked her to bring a pen and paper. However, when Annis learned that she also needed the family crest seal, she was completely stunned. A while later, Hans encountered a worried Annis near Judy's room. The The maid was glad to see the butler, but her eyes were filled with confusion. Seeing this, Hans quickly asked what had happened. He was shocked to hear Anna say that Walter seemed to have told Judy everything. Only then did he realize that the Baron's worries hadn't been in vain. After learning the truth, the young lady couldn't stand idly by. At that moment, she was sitting at her desk, hurriedly writing a letter to her father. As the eldest daughter of the Follett family, in order to save her family and her homeland, she decided to take this desperate action. She was willing to do anything to protect her family's honor and estate. According to imperial custom, parents decided their children's marriages. But for noble families, this rule was enforced even more strictly. For the well-being of the people, the right choice had to be made. Judy might love Walter deeply, but he was a commoner. If she married him, she would have to give up her title as Baroness. Clearly, this would do nothing to help the Follett family prosper. She knew her father only wanted her happiness, which was why he had allowed her to be with her beloved. She felt she could never repay her father's kindness. Soon after, Hans knocked on the Baron's office door, hoping he wasn't too busy. The Baron invited him in, lost in thought, wondering what news the butler had brought. Looking at the Baron, who used a resolute expression to mask his despair and pain, Hans didn't know where to begin. He first confirmed that Walter and Judy had indeed spoken for a long time. The Baron became even more perplexed, wondering if Judy had learned the whole truth. The butler admitted, regretfully, that she had, and then lowered his head. The hero sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair, his mind full of confusion. His biggest fear was that he wouldn't be able to hide the truth from his daughter. There were other matters as well, but Hans wasn't sure if he had the right to tell his master about them. He believed that the young lady should know about this, and also about the conversation between the Baron and Walter. The hero agreed with him, deciding that sooner or later she would find out. Besides, Judy had specifically written a letter to the butler, asking him to give it to her father. The Baron was very surprised when he received the letter and became even more alarmed when he saw the family seal on it. In a letter, the girl stated that she was no longer just her father's beloved daughter. She wanted her father to see her as the heir to the Fleet family, bearing the responsibility of protecting the family's honor and property. Now the family and their territory were facing a great threat, and she already knew everything. Zachary, using the power of the Chamber of Commerce, was forcing the Merchants Guild to become their enemy. Her father also understood that if this situation continued, their territory would become impoverished and their people would suffer. Moreover, they simply didn't have the funds to save the family. If the people fell into poverty, they would no longer be able to pay taxes. In that case, the Fleet family would lose the right to govern their territory. Judy firmly believed that if they asked their relatives for help, the Emperor would definitely find out about this. Stoll was an influential and serious man, no matter what noble they were. He could make them unable to escape. Therefore, from that moment on, Judy dared not consider her own happiness anymore. Whether she married Walter or continued to fight against the Capps family, the final result would be the same. Roald Fleet and his loyal subjects would continue to suffer. Therefore, Judy placed her hopes on her father's wisdom and understanding. She believed there was only one way out. She had to marry Zachary's son. After reading the letter, the Baron flew into a rage, wondering if this was their only salvation. Soon after, a large flock of geese flew over the sunlit capital. Two young men were walking down the street. Seeing these birds, they realized that hunting season was about to begin. One of them mentioned that he had recently heard that he was also a good hunter. It seemed that Zachary Capps had recently caught a poor little bird, who turned out to be Baron Fleet's daughter. They were getting married this month, and if everything went according to Cap's plan, his company would be even more influential than before. Meanwhile, Anna's passed by in a carriage, calling out to the girls to get out. Rose, Judy's sister, was overwhelmed by the surrounding crowd and the number of carriages. Daisy, also Judy's sister, didn't know what to say to her. The maid felt that Judy probably wouldn't like to see the tears on her sister's faces. Therefore, it was best to greet her with a smile, because today she would become a member of the large Capps family. Soon after, Judy sat quietly by the window, watching the geese fly away. Perhaps they were also flying to distant lands to escape the harsh winter. Suddenly, the door opened, and Judy turned to see her sisters. Judy was very happy to see them and curious about the current situation in the Fleet territory. It turned out that thanks to Judy, the family had not only avoided isolation, but had also received financial support. Judy was happy to hear this news because it meant that her people would be able to get through the winter safely. In addition, the Cap's family had sent many beautiful dresses, which made Rose very happy. However, Judy thought her sister was more lovely than any dress. The little girl jumped up with joy, thinking that since Judy was getting married, she would be able to wear such dresses every day. Her words made Daisy angry because Rose didn't realize the seriousness of the situation. Annis covered her mouth with her hand, thinking that Judy needed to prepare for the ceremony, so they should go see the Baron. Judy looked at her and nodded in agreement. It was time. The ceremony would begin soon. Afterward, a brand new life would begin. However, Judy couldn't help but feel that this wasn't a beginning for her, but an end. Soon after, the banquet hall was filled with guests from all over the world. Two dignified, noble women saw Judy and her mother and kept praising them. Judy was grateful that they had come to congratulate her, but it was also natural, as these two noble women were actually their distant relatives. However, the ladies noticed that the unpleasant smell only dissipated after they entered Judy's room. The girl's mother, not understanding what they meant, looked at them in surprise. Apparently, Zachary had invited many commoners to the wedding, who were desperately trying to get close to the influential nobles. These commoners had nothing but money, so their children looked like crows, dressed in peacock feathers. The ladies were shocked. Didn't they know that for the nobility, marrying commoners was the greatest shame? Judy and her mother didn't respond, only silently watching them. Suddenly, after leading the ladies out of her daughter's room, the mother decided the bride wasn't ready for the ceremony and decided to see them later. The noble women safely began to leave. They waved goodbye to Judy, and one of them accidentally bumped into a young man beside her. The woman turned sharply to him, furious that he dared to touch her. Leonard smiled, first apologizing for his rudeness, as he was greeting the guests and hadn't noticed the esteemed ladies at all. The ladies then realized he was the groom, so Leonard decided to introduce himself, offering to escort them to the ballroom. They smiled, and one of the ladies commented that he was clearly not without manners at any rate. However, the noble woman brushed off the spot where he had touched her, not wanting the hero to get any ideas, as he wasn't worthy to even stand next to her, let alone anything else. Therefore, he needn't bother escorting her, as her butler would do a much better job. The woman turned to her servant, Martinez, expecting him to immediately escort her to the ballroom. The handsome man gave Leonard a disdainful look and hurried to fulfill his mistress's request. Leonard was left alone, bewildered and angered by the noble's behavior. Meanwhile, Agnes hurried to inform Judy's mother that someone wanted to see the bride. Judy was surprised to learn the visitor was from the Follett estate, since everyone she had invited had already arrived. Knowing there wasn't much time left before the ceremony, her mother wanted to postpone the meeting with this guest. However, it turned out Zachary had forbidden this person from entering, so he could only wait outside. Judy was surprised by this and thought that this guest must have gone through a lot of trouble to see her. She got up, promising her mother she would return before the ceremony, and prepared to meet the person. At this moment, she hadn't yet become the old man's puppet, so she wanted to properly say goodbye to everyone as Judy Follett. The hallway was empty. It seemed everyone was in the ballroom. Judy thought that even though the wedding hadn't taken place yet, the Kappas family was already acting like high-class nobles. In Agnes's opinion, the guests and the Kappas family weren't being excessive, but Judy knew very well that they were just too proud. Finally, they reached the place where Judy could meet her guest. Realizing it could only be one person, Judy became very nervous, as they hadn't seen each other in a long time. The maid fully understood her feelings, as this was the last time they would see each other. Suddenly, Agnes realized she had spoken too heavily and looked at the girl in alarm. She decided to apologize in advance, in case she had unintentionally hurt her. Unable to believe everything would end like this, the maid felt that Miss Judy really needed to have a good talk with Walter. Judy smiled, fully agreeing with her words. She gave the maid one last look and prepared to meet the hero. Agnes couldn't help but shed tears, wishing her mistress good luck. Judy thanked her and turned, quickly walking away. Stepping outside, she came to a small balcony overlooking the beautiful garden. When Walter saw her, he was amazed at how well the dress suited her. The hero also didn't want her to be angry with Agnes, as he was the one who had persuaded the maid to call her. Judy tried to control her emotions and turned to look at him. Walter approached her, feeling like he hadn't seen her in ages. With an annoyed expression, The girl was shocked that he had so recklessly pulled her away from her engagement ceremony. Moreover, didn't the hero know how dangerous it was for her to even speak to him like this? She was certain that if anyone knew they were meeting, he would be in trouble, so it was best to return to the Follett estate immediately. After listening to her words, Walter remembered that since that day, he hadn't received a single letter or even a wedding invitation. But Judy was angry because she and her father had kept everything from her, and she couldn't even understand the hardships of those around her. They treated her like a doll, but she wasn't a weak person at all, and she didn't want to see others toy with her. Walter looked at her calmly, wondering if she truly felt that way. Did she really want to hurt him, to make him experience the pain she had endured? If her love for him had cooled that night, why was Judy standing before him now? What puzzled Walter the most was why she was shedding tears. Under these circumstances, Judy wondered if he had come to dissuade her. If Walter wanted revenge, he could have easily mocked her without hesitation. But no matter what happened, Judy was determined not to back down, to see this through. Just then, Walter suddenly grabbed her and pulled her into a tight embrace, leaving her bewildered. At that moment, two maids passed by, discussing Leonard's handsomeness and the wedding. One of them wished that one day Walter would make her his 100th wife. The other maid laughed, thinking her friend was foolish, and then they safely departed. However, even after they left, Walter was still reluctant to let Judy go. She began to struggle, ordering him to release her immediately, but Walter was determined not to, leaving Judy stunned. He had made up his mind to love only Judy Follett for the rest of his life. Judy didn't understand what he was holding on to, feeling despair wash over her as she could no longer express her emotions. However, Walter was also completely unwilling to treat Judy as his possession. He had never thought that way before, and he wouldn't now. Walter sincerely hoped that his princess would always remember him. From now on, his heart and soul would belong only to her. Everything she loved, her hometown and family, Walter intended to protect at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. He only wished that she would always remember that she had once been Judy Follett. No matter what difficulties he might face in the future, Walter would never forget her and would always remember the carefree times they had shared. Walter decided to cherish these memories forever. He then leaned closer to her face, wanting to kiss her for the first and last time. Walter was the first person to give everything for Judy, but she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. On the way back, Judy never looked back, bidding farewell to her first love forever. Her wedding to Leonard proceeded according to Zachary's wishes, but it was different from everything Judy had imagined as a child. Furthermore, adjusting to her husband would be difficult. After all, she had only met him today for the first time. The only consolation was that the thick veil covered her face, and no one could see Judy's tears. After the ceremony, the coachman called for the newlyweds to board the carriage, preparing to take them to the mansion. Through the carriage window, Judy looked at her parents, wondering when she would see them again. Her parents watched her with sorrowful eyes, hoping to see her again someday. Meanwhile, Zachary Capps was receiving congratulations from the guests and thanking them for coming. He turned and suddenly looked towards the carriage, his gaze meeting Judy's. He realized he was now her father-in-law, and Judy wondered if she had the courage to face him. Regardless, one of his sons had become her husband, and Judy turned her gaze towards him. Leonard Capps sat opposite her, staring intently out the window. Suddenly, he turned his gaze sharply towards his wife, causing her to flinch. At that moment, Judy couldn't help but wonder how he viewed this marriage. If he had firmly opposed it, how would her life have turned out? However, it had already happened, and there was no point in dwelling on it. Upon arriving at the mansion, the head maid, Diana, and her staff greeted them, wanting to create a comfortable and welcoming atmosphere for the newlyweds. Judy looked at the enormous mansion, astonished by its size. Suddenly, Leonard expressed his desire to be alone, asking only that his wife be attended to. Diana suddenly approached Judy, snatching the luggage from her hand, wanting to personally escort her to her room. Judy hadn't expected such a brusque action and felt somewhat embarrassed, having just stepped onto Cap's territory. Her legs trembled slightly, and she felt lost, unsure of what kind of life awaited her in such a place. On the way to her room, she learned from the maid that from today onwards, this mansion was her new home. Noticing how spacious the building was, Judy looked forward to Diana's care. Hearing these words, the head maid immediately turned to look at her. Her Her expression was displeased. It seemed to her that Judy had overlooked one fact. From now on, she was a commoner, just like everyone else. Therefore, the maids had no obligation to fulfill her requests, as she wasn't the mistress here. The other maids watched the girl, who clearly hadn't anticipated any of this, with amusement. But Judy quickly composed herself, deciding that from now on, as a commoner, she should indeed be more respectful of others. She resolved not to complicate the servants' lives. Diana was stunned by this response from the former noble, frozen in place. The others were also bewildered, hearing that Judy didn't consider herself their mistress and was willing to take on the responsibility of caring for the mansion. She firmly believed that as long as everyone worked together, any problem could be overcome. After a moment of stunned silence, Diana abruptly turned and headed towards the girl's room. Judy, with a hopeful smile, watched the maid leave and then followed. Upon reaching the room, Diana placed Judy's luggage inside, expecting her to unpack it herself. Judy entered the room and was struck by its spaciousness and opulence. On the one hand, the room's decor appeared somewhat antiquated, but even so, it was clearly one of the best options available. Despite the old-fashioned style, everything was exquisitely crafted, as if she had stepped into a fairy tale. Judy turned to Diana, feeling that she had done an excellent job. Just then, the head maid noticed the girl's peculiar gait. Realizing what was happening, she advised Judy to straighten her back while walking. Judy followed her advice, hoping she was doing it correctly. Diana believed that if Judy intended to continue living in this mansion, she needed to be more confident. No one here would pamper a princess who had never seen the world. The reason was simple. The Kapu's family had no need for useless individuals. Therefore, the new mistress had to find a way to contribute to this. The Kapu's family would not hesitate to cast her out. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the mansion, the servants were joyfully greeting their master, Leonard, but he angrily barked at them to shut up and get to work. Seeing the surrounding mess, he even wondered if his father had sent him to some pauper shack. A new servant was terrified by the scene, while the others urged him to bow lower. Leonard stormed back to his room, tossing his coat to a servant upon entering and ordering him to bring whiskey on the rocks immediately. The servant hastily apologized to his master and rushed to carry out the order. Shortly after, he returned with a tray, trembling as he presented the whiskey on the rocks to Leonard. Leonard took the glass, wanting nothing more than to be left alone, and the servant promptly departed. He recalled how, not long ago, he had firmly refused his father's arranged marriage, as he already had someone he loved. However, Zachary believed that his son's irresponsible behavior was a disgrace to the family. Had he forgotten that marriage was the most important tool for doing business? But Leonard argued that the company could thrive even without this foolish marriage. As a result, he received a stinging slap from his father, who couldn't understand how his son dared to talk back to him. If Miranda dared to oppose this marriage, she would become an outcast throughout the entire empire. Zachary only needed to say a word, and everyone would consider her a gold digger who had approached the family for money. No matter how many times they argued, his father couldn't be persuaded. So Leonard decided to write to Miranda, telling her everything that had happened. The letter quickly reached her hands, and after reading it, the girl tore it to shreds. Leonard assumed this was the end of their relationship, but to his surprise, he soon received a reply from her. In a letter, Miranda detailed a plan to resolve this hopeless predicament. Leonard was astonished, as he had always assumed she loathed his family, including him. But the letter outlined a simple yet ingenious plan. She said Miranda would eventually have to return the wedding ring to him, but the plan was to return it to her a year later. His father had ordered him to marry Baron Follett's daughter, but he hadn't forbidden him from divorcing her a year later. The Kapu's family would use that year to establish connections with enough upper-class nobles, and the company would gain many new clients as a result. By then, Zachary would have no reason to refuse his son's choice. Marry his beloved, and then no one would be able to stand in their way. The influence of the Fleet family wouldn't be enough to interfere with their plans. If Leonard asked for a divorce, they wouldn't be able to utter a word of opposition, and the wedding ring would finally return to its rightful owner. Leonard would fulfill his past promise and marry Miranda. They would have a wedding that only the upper aristocracy could afford, making everyone envious. Moved by the contents of the letter, Leonard marveled at his beloved's intelligence. However, in his reply, he decided to clarify one point. Since it concerned the Baron's daughter, he couldn't divorce divorce her without a valid reason. Therefore, they had to come up with a suitable justification. But Miranda found a solution: entrust the company affairs to the girl and burden her with impossible tasks. Now a commoner, Judy was obligated to assist in managing the Cap's family business. She had to do this while also taking care of the mansion like a good mistress. No matter how difficult it was, she couldn't refuse, or it would damage her reputation. Sooner or later, she would become overwhelmed, start making mistakes, and then face accusations. Of course, the one who would dislike this the most would be Leonard's father. Realizing this was a sufficient reason for divorce, Leonard thought his beloved was a genius. In every way, Miranda was superior to his aristocratic wife. His lover was far more elegant and beautiful than the girl who had never experienced real life. Even on their wedding day, there were some strange things that puzzled Leonard. Despite it being a joyous occasion, the noble lady shed tears as she walked down the aisle. But no matter how sympathetic, it was time to formulate a plan and put it into action. Leonard called for a servant, placed whiskey on the table, and hurriedly put on his coat. When the servant arrived, Leonard instructed him to invite his wife to the courtyard garden. Furthermore, as per Leonard's orders, she was to come alone. Like himself, Leonard believed he and his wife needed to discuss their future married life. Soon, Diana personally went to Judy to convey her master's invitation. Judy looked at her in surprise, but agreed obediently. While waiting in the summer kitchen, Leonard also instructed the servants to prepare some refreshments for his wife. However, unfortunately for her, a very unpleasant conversation awaited, which he found rather amusing. Later, Judy joined him, and maid brought them hot tea. Thanking the servant, Leonard dismissed her and instructed that no one was to disturb them. Looking at Judy, he thought she looked completely different now compared to their wedding day. Leonard was displeased with her mediocre attire and appearance, which didn't befit a noblewoman. He had learned the reason from his father, why the girl's family had agreed to the marriage. Previously, Leonard had been puzzled as to why the Baron would marry his beloved daughter to a commoner. He sneered at her maliciously, hardly believing that her family was on the verge of ruin. He also remembered that Zachary had given them a large sum of money to make the marriage happen. Leonard realized his guess was correct. Judy had sold her reputation for money. From her expression, Judy seemed uncomfortable when he mentioned her transgression. After apologizing for his harsh words, Leonard decided there was no need for pleasantries between them, as it was a marriage of convenience. He also wanted to know the girl's own opinion on the matter. Judy agreed with him, which pleased Leonard. He also wanted to clarify that even in a marriage of convenience, he believed in being honest with his wife. Judy calmly took a sip of tea, seemingly prepared for anything. However, when Leonard revealed he already had a lover, it left her bewildered. Therefore, Leonard hoped she would only play the role of his wife in formal settings. Seeing the surprise in her eyes, Leonard felt a bit awkward and decided to confess everything. His lover's name was Miranda, as proud and elegant as a red rose. At the academy they attended together, everyone knew she was a very talented student. Leonard was overjoyed when such a beautiful girl reciprocated his feelings. While recounting their love story in detail, Leonard carefully observed Judy. Throughout the entire time, Judy didn't move a muscle, not even blinking. As he finished his story, Leonard remarked that neither he nor his beloved would abandon their promise. He also hoped he hadn't been rude or offended the girl during their conversation. She sat pensively, gazing sadly into her teacup, absorbing what she had just heard. Then, Judy suddenly concluded that she understood his feelings better than anyone. Leonard stared at her in shock, utterly bewildered by her presumption of understanding, thinking she must have someone she liked as well. Leonard couldn't understand why anger flared within him as he looked at her face. He mentally told her not to presume to understand him even a little, as she was only marrying him for money. But then he reconsidered. It was better this way. It meant that neither of them would be alone after the divorce. Leonard grinned, thinking Judy was incredibly lucky that there was someone in the world willing to accept a flawed woman. Judy's hands trembled slightly with agitation. She decided to clarify what exactly he meant by divorce. Leonard smiled, satisfied to see Judy's astonishment. He decided to stop beating around the bush and confess that he simply wanted a divorce. She probably already realized that there was no point in staying with someone she didn't love. However, Judy knew the biggest problem was actually her current husband's father. Leonard agreed, also believing his father wouldn't consent to a divorce. But fortunately, he had already found a solution. In a year, the wedding ring would be returned to its rightful owner. that is, Miranda. During that year, he hoped Judy would continue to act as his wife. After a year, she and her family could live without worry. Of course, after the divorce, public opinion of her would decline considerably. To avoid suspicion, Leonard had even written a letter, mentally picturing Judy as a simple-minded noblewoman. He believed this arrangement was suitable for everyone. Judy sat expressionless, analyzing everything she had heard. Soon, Leonard saw her nod and heard Judy reply that she understood. Pleased with this, Leonard decided the agreement would take effect starting today. Even though he assumed Diana had already told her, he decided to confirm that Judy hadn't gone near his room. At this point, their conversation ended, and Leonard rose to leave, but Judy wanted to confirm one more thing. For her, sitting around doing nothing for a whole year was akin to death. Moreover, her family had always believed in, "He who does not work, neither shall he eat." Leonard smiled with a haughty expression, thinking that nobles and commoners weren't so different after all. Therefore, Judy humbly lowered her head, hoping to be allowed to help with the company's affairs. Leonard readily agreed, wondering if fate itself was on his side. Afterwards, the newlyweds returned to the mansion together and encountered Diana along the way. Leonard decided to ask her where the tea they had drunk came from. Leonard had enjoyed the tea immensely and discovered it was a product of their company's new partner. He turned to Judy, hoping the tea was befitting a noblewoman. Judy replied that the tea had a pleasant aroma, and while initially sweet, a bitterness quickly followed. Seeing their expressions, she tried to simplify her explanation and finally settled on saying she liked it. Suddenly, Leonard had a brilliant idea. He decided to have the servants consult Judy about new products from now on. From today onwards, she would assist in managing the Capps family business, and any questions could be directed to her. Because of her noble upbringing, her opinions were extremely valuable. Diana looked at the mistress with suspicion, her eyes narrowing in displeasure. The other maids treated her as insignificant, reluctantly agreeing to their master's arrangement. Judy curtsied, intending to do her best and hoping to be of use. This further annoyed Diana, who abruptly turned away, unable to hide her emotions. She then ordered Judy to follow her, leading her to the Capps family library. A large desk sat in the center of the spacious room where Judy would work. Enormous bookshelves lined the walls, filled with countless books. The maid explained that any business begins with documentation, and in the Capps family, all decisions were carefully calculated, so the documents contained all the information. Information about all transactions. Hearing this, Judy concluded that this room could be considered the Capps family company archives. Diana looked at Judy suspiciously, puzzled by her conclusion, even though it turned out to be correct. Initially, the head maid hadn't known where to arrange Judy's workspace when a master informed her that the new mistress would be working for them. Diana was shocked when Leonard told her to simply place a desk in the archive room, considering it housed a wealth of important information. But according to Leonard, his father kept the most crucial information to himself, and Judy likely lacked the necessary specialized education to understand most of the technical jargon anyway. Thus, the head maid was now somewhat perplexed by Judy's accurate assessment of the location, but decided not to dwell on it. She added that the maids would bring all the necessary documents, and no one was allowed to touch anything in the archive room without permission. As per the master's instructions, Judy could start working today, and her working hours would be the same as everyone else's. However, Diana was quite certain that Leonard had already informed his wife of all the details. Judy remembered Leonard saying that she shouldn't expect leniency just because it was her first time doing this kind of work. They weren't just ordinary people. They were the Capps family, and they could never afford to lose their reputation for anything. Hearing Judy reiterate Leonard's words, the head maid was relieved, understanding his intentions. Zachary and Leonard's mother also had high expectations for their daughter-in-law. In this lady's view, behind every successful man was a successful woman. Since networking was crucial for business, the wife also had to attend tea parties and banquets. When Judy heard that she needed to start preparing for events, she wanted to clarify how frequently she would be expected to attend these tea parties. Diana believed the more frequent, the better. As soon as Judy finished her work for the company, she should immediately begin preparing. Moreover, only after fulfilling her duties would she have time to take care of herself. Having said these words, the head maid slammed the library door shut and left, leaving Judy alone. Now, Judy was finally certain that this place was her cage. Learning about Leonard's mistress, Judy was momentarily consumed by anger. Had Zachary not even spared his own son? Perhaps Leonard was also unhappy with this marriage, just like her, and might even agree with her perspective. Even though they were both enduring the same pain, Leonard had only looked at her with disdain. His demeanor was arrogant, as he was well aware of the fate that awaited a divorced woman. Even at the tea party, Judy realized he was just trying to get revenge on her. After all, if it weren't for her, Leonard could have married the woman he loved long ago. Furthermore, he clearly took her for a fool. Otherwise, he wouldn't have agreed so readily. The figures in their marriage contract were incredibly large. But what exactly was hidden behind those numbers? After receiving this money, could she really live as she did before? If she could return to Walter, he would surely embrace her again, pitying her. However, would Judy gain freedom, or would Zachary try to take her back? If she kept running, she would never be free. So she had to become stronger to protect everything precious to her. After reading a few documents, Judy found many unfamiliar words whose meanings she didn't yet understand, but she was determined to figure everything out and uncover all the Capps family secrets. Leonard had greatly underestimated her, and she would not give up. Her revenge had just begun, and soon she would make the Capps family pay for everything. The next morning, after greeting a maid, "Good morning," Diana hoped she would work hard and told the night shift maids to go have breakfast. In addition, the young mistress had to be woken up. Diana instructed a maid to do this, believing it was almost time for work. The maid took this as a true test and hurried to carry out the order with a mix of pain and trepidation. Standing in front of Judy's door, the maid felt exhausted from being assigned to wake the noble lady. Moreover, the young mistress had worked until dawn and was probably still asleep. Judy's room was the most beautiful in the entire Capps mansion, but also the loneliest. After calling out a few times without a response, the maid decided to enter. But suddenly, she heard the mistress's voice before she had been invited in. Judy was sitting quietly on the sofa, reading a book, waiting for the maid. If it was time for work, she was ready to go to the archive room. Judy was startled to see the maid push the door open without permission. She hoped that next time the maid would wait a little longer. The maid quickly apologized, not wanting to frighten her, but explained that because the room was so quiet, she assumed the mistress was still resting. Zachary, his wife, and their son, Leonard, were having breakfast in the dining room, engaged in light conversation. The moment Judy entered and wished everyone good morning, the room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. The girl apologized for her tardiness, explaining that she had been working until dawn. She also expressed her pleasure at finally meeting them, as this was their first encounter. Zachary, deciding to overlook her lateness for once, gestured for her to sit beside her husband. Judy took her designated seat and began to eat with grace, her movements refined and adhering to proper etiquette. Zachary's wife was surprised to realize that nobles even had a particular way of eating, as she couldn't hear a single sound of cutlery from Judy. Leonard started to retort that they also ate without making noise, but his mother thought he should be more humble. She smiled faintly at her husband, thinking that regardless of status, anyone could master proper etiquette. Zachary's wife smiled with a hint of malice, thinking that her daughter-in-law wasn't entirely without manners, but she was clearly mistaken. She couldn't help but begin to scold Judy in front of her husband, surprising even herself. Judy froze, staring at her in surprise. Zachary, feeling his wife shouldn't frighten the girl, decided to change the subject. He was more interested in what he had recently heard from his son, that Judy wanted to help with the family business. Zachary thought she was indeed a bright girl and wondered if his wife felt the same. She agreed, stating that since Judy was no longer a noble after marriage, she should help her new family. However, in Zachary's wife's opinion, the most important task of any wife was to bear an heir. She also believed one child wasn't enough. It would be best to have 2 boys at once. After all, a wife who couldn't even accomplish such a simple task was practically worthless. Leonard coughed, interjecting that they had just gotten married and it was too early to talk about children. Judy was bewildered by the awkward situation, unsure if they should even be considering children, as they weren't truly husband and wife. She thought to herself that she liked children and hoped to have more than one, and that it was essential to know how to raise them well. For instance, if a couple had only one child, as long as they were well educated and successful, that would be enough. Judy admired how well Zachary and his wife had raised their only son. She thought that Zachary's wife must have known their upbringing was impeccable, which was why they hadn't had a second child. Upon hearing this, Zachary's wife's face changed. She stood up shakily, claiming a sudden loss of appetite and excusing herself. Furthermore, she could no longer see any difference between Judy and an ordinary person, as she possessed no air of elegance. Zachary was surprised by her doubts, as Judy was clearly Baron Follett's daughter. But as it turned out, that wasn't what his wife meant. She also reminded Leonard of his promise to go shopping with her. Judy, aware that Zachary's wife wanted to appear more feminine in front of Leonard, was convinced this was meant to hurt her. She had been taught from a young age that a woman who couldn't bear children was useless, so she always compared herself to others. It was said that Zachary's wife had even been tormented by infertility in her youth, worried about what others thought of her. Since she couldn't even bear a daughter, she probably wouldn't have objected if Zachary had brought a mistress home. The worst-case scenario would have been a divorce. But one day, she finally gave birth to Leonard, and from then on, her son became her treasure, defining her worth. She wanted to mold him into her ideal, cherishing him above all else. Fearing anyone would hurt him, she changed her attitude towards others, becoming haughty. Therefore, the Countess only evoked sympathy from Judy, who hadn't even considered revenge. After the meal, Judy decided to ask if she could study economics to help with the family business. Zachary was even more shocked by her request, believing only men could handle such a difficult task. Of course, he appreciated her enthusiasm, but it would be best for her to remain quiet and not interfere in these matters. Judy was perplexed by this refusal, as she simply wanted to contribute to the company's development. But Leonard immediately ordered her not to contradict his father, as what he said was self-evident, and it was strange that she didn't understand. Zachary decided that instead of studying economics, it would be better for Judy to understand how society worked, and the best way to do that was to have her work in a shop. Women are better suited to communicating with customers and handling orders. So after Judy expressed her gratitude, she will work as a shop assistant. Zachary thought that although she had some shortcomings, she could do things others couldn't. He hoped she could forgive his wife, who still couldn't let go of her son. He felt that nothing was sweeter than a parent's love for their child. Judy didn't mind, as she only wanted revenge on him. During the day, the city streets were bustling with activity, the air thick with a sense of busyness and haste. People were discussing the recent rumors that a worker at the camp had suddenly collapsed from overwork. At this time, in the jewelry store, employees were recommending a buy-one-get-one free promotion to customers. Aviel, working as a consultant, was helping a customer choose items. Just then, the jewelry store door was suddenly pushed open. An employee announced that the head of the family would arrive in 5 minutes. Aviel, like the other employees, panicked, and everyone immediately began to put everything in order. Zachary walked into the store, hoping to hear that all the employees had met their performance targets. He asked for each employee's performance report, because foolish people shouldn't earn the same amount as others. Just then, the front door opened again, and a beautiful lady walked in, greeting everyone. Zachary happily introduced his daughter-in-law, Judy, and announced that she would be working there from that day forward. He ordered everyone to teach her well. Judy thought to herself that she must work hard and contribute to the store. Aviel looked at the girl with doubt, surprised by her words, and returned her greeting. He then led her to the staff lounge and invited her to sit on the sofa. Judy wanted to decide what kind of work she would do. Upon learning that Aviel was the store manager, she thanked him for his hard work. As Zachary's subordinate, he must be in a difficult position, unsure of what kind of work to assign to the boss's daughter-in-law. For Judy, this was a rare opportunity, and she had to give it her all and learn everything. Initially, she wanted to do some housework, but Aviel felt that dirty work wasn't suitable for a noble lady. However, Judy didn't mind, because now she was just a commoner, and moreover, the head of the family had personally ordered her training. The girl was determined to do a good job. She didn't want to embarrass the store at all. Hoping to be treated as an ordinary new employee, Judy quickly changed into her work uniform. When she walked into the hall, all the employees who saw her were stunned by her beauty. She looked equally stunning in her work uniform. Mrs. Abby introduced herself to Judy and said she would be in charge of her training. Aviel explained that all the consultants had been trained by Mrs. Abby, so everyone respected her and sought her help when they encountered difficulties. Feeling that Mrs. Abby was being overpraised, she turned to Judy, Realizing that this was her first job, it would be better to start with simple tasks. Judy didn't want everyone to worry about her. After all, nobility was just a title. Due to the shortage of manpower and the small population on her own territory. Even while living on her own land, Judy would help her people with their daily chores, sometimes even working in the fields. The employees were shocked, wondering if she, as a noble lady, really did these things. Judy could barely manage a smile, but inside, she wanted to open her heart to these people. Now, she had a good opportunity to take revenge on the Capuz family, but she didn't understand why there was a faint ache in her chest. Mrs. Abby was indeed a kind person. All the employees in the store were like a big family. Suddenly, someone urgently called for Abby's help because Mackenzie had mixed up the documents again. Mrs. Abby didn't want to leave the new girl, but the matter was urgent, so she had to rush over. Judy then understood why everyone relied on Mrs. Abby so much, and it was because of her that every employee was so kind and diligent. It was a pity that such a good person had to work for someone as despicable as Zachary. Thinking that under Mrs. Abby's guidance, Mackenzie would definitely become a first-class employee, Judy turned her gaze towards the cashier counter. A cashier was politely serving a customer, while a girl beside her seemed a little lost. Judging from her appearance, she must have been working there for a long time, and Judy wanted to talk to her. Judy smiled at her, understanding that dealing with customers must be very hard. In the evening, at the end of the workday, a young employee left early because of a date. The others planned to go to a restaurant for dinner together. Abby looked at Judy and decided to ask if her young master would come to pick her up. Under these circumstances, a newlywed couple might feel awkward sitting with strangers. Judy was certain Leonard wouldn't come for her. After all, he was a very busy man. Meanwhile, she figured he was probably at some club, drinking, not caring about the company or his pretend wife. Her colleagues urged her to sit with them, but unfortunately, she had been strictly instructed not to stay out too late after work. Mrs. Abby smiled, thinking the young master was being too hard on his wife. Oval also decided to support Judy. Everyone remembered Sir Leonard was never lenient, not even with his family, which meant he also had expectations of his wife, so there was no need to be disheartened. Judy thanked them for their support, not even realizing she had started to cry. Their kind words moved her to tears. Just then, Leonard walked into the shop to pick up his wife, surprising everyone. He apologized for being late, explaining that he had been delayed by some business, and knew Judy's first day must have been tiring. The shop employees cheered. They knew he would come for her. Leonard seemed confused, wondering how he could have let his beloved wife walk the dark city streets alone. Judy ignored him, walking straight past him towards the carriage. Her actions left Leonard bewildered, looking ly at the employees. They immediately jumped in to smooth things over, explaining that she thought he wouldn't come and that he must have been too strict with her. Leonard dismissed it as a misunderstanding and sighed calmly, following his wife outside. But when he saw her get into the carriage, he froze. A strange and extremely unpleasant feeling washed over him. He didn't understand why. If they were only pretending to be married, her attitude bothered him so much.